Hello, and welcome back to the Donor Centric Approach. This podcast is brought to you by MRP Donor Development, where we put our donors at the center of everything that we do. This podcast is also brought to you by our friends and sponsors at Stellar Web Systems, the nonprofit tech solution. As always, I am your host, Orlando Barros, and we have a great show on tap for you because we have a great guest. With us today is Dr. Dan Baillargeon, founder of Mission Driven Catholic, an organization that exists to strengthen Catholic schools as centers of evangelization and support families in the evangelizing mission of the church. Dan, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Yeah. And actually, my wife and I, we're kind of co-founders in this. We both started this enterprise together with Hearts of Evangelization. We've done this work for a long time. And it was a mutual decision when we decided to open Mission Driven Catholic to help save souls through Catholic education and supporting the families.
Amen. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll talk more about that founding story in a second. I just want to set the scene for the show today. We're going to be discussing the exciting aspect of founding an organization and being in the early stages, like Mission Driven Catholic, the struggles that early stage organizations sort of find, particularly with balancing fundraising and operations. And we'll discuss some lessons that we have learned and how other nonprofit leaders and ministries can apply to their own organizations and missions. So without further ado, Dan, welcome. Thank you for being here. And let's start this conversation by talking about the mission of Mission Driven Catholic and the problem that you are solving. So if you want to take us back to the beginning when you and your wife were discussing the idea, how it came about and what you're doing today.
Yeah, that's great. And that could be a podcast episode in of itself, right? The founding story, as most of these are. Yeah, I was a superintendent of Catholic schools. I've been in Catholic education my whole life. Even in the midst of those things, my wife and I, we've done a number of different ministries, marriage ministry, confirmation retreats, and we have a real passion for souls and what the church does. As a superintendent in a diocese, I was affecting change. I was utilizing my expertise and the lessons learned, but we felt like we didn't have the ability to scale, to be able to help more schools around the country. I was in a very small office. I really wanted to assist as many Catholic schools as possible in embracing the evangelizing mission of the church. We decided that I was going to leave that job and pursue this, where I could be of support and resource to Catholic schools around the country. And then we could continue to do our work in supporting families in the evangelizing efforts of the church as well.
You talk about supporting families within the sphere of Catholic education. Let's break that down a little bit, because for our listeners, especially those who are Catholic, when somebody mentions Catholic education, that could mean many different things. So what makes Mission Driven Catholic different from other Catholic education initiatives today?
The church is very clear that the parents are the primary educators of the faith. And many Catholic schools can easily fall into the trap of being student-centric, when realistically our school should be family-centric, right? Because our ability to evangelize passes through the family, right? And so that's one really distinct difference. Even when we're doing strategic planning, we're very much open in formation about how can we support families and how do we help these schools support families in living out the fullness of the faith. So that's part of it. Another distinction for us is that we are really joyful evangelizers. Like, our whole purpose is to help people encounter Christ. So our Catholic schools are really great places, if they're doing what they need to, right? To have this real encounter with Christ. For whom? For the principal, for the community, for the parents, for the students, for the faculty. An encounter with Christ, an encounter with his radical love for them, right? We come in and we want these schools to be centers of evangelization, places where people can come and be formed and be fed and be nourished in the life of the faith. And obviously, be excellent in all ways, right? But those aren't mutually exclusive. And at Mission Driven Catholic, we believe they work hand in hand, and excellence, right, feeds into Catholic culture, and Catholic culture informs excellence. And by doing them well together and keeping the focus on what the church wants us to, our ability to be mission-driven organizations increases, and our ability to reach more souls increases as well.
Yes. I mean, because if you're not just focused on the student themselves, it's at least times 2 or times 3,
Right.
depending on the size of the family.
And we also know that not every family is perfect, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to bring Christ to every family in the situation where they are. And we also know not every family in our Catholic school is Catholic, but that still we have this charge by Christ himself to make disciples of all the nations, to bring his love to them in wherever they are, in whatever state they are, so that they can have that encounter with him.
So you're mentioning a couple of things that we can go in many different avenues. This might be a 3-parter because we're going to take like 4 hours digesting everything. I know we don't have all the time in the world, but I'm just so intrigued. I was like, I'm trying to stop myself from continuing going out that route. But let's come back to where you are right now. Still early stages. Correct me if I'm wrong. This was 2024 was your first full year?
Our first full year as a nonprofit. So in the year before, we existed as an LLC because I left one job, and we did make the decision in 2024 to become a nonprofit specifically because the work that we do is nonprofit work. It's all about building up the community of Christ. And so we knew that it was aligned better that way in order for us to do the work through having a nonprofit status, which has its own challenges, as you know.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about it in just a second. But since making that change or that big shift, how have things evolved? Has it been like a natural progression, or has it been more adjusting to the shift from a for-profit to a nonprofit?
It wasn't too difficult. I have a lot of experience helping schools and getting their status, right? And so we kind of knew what we were getting into. We had to form a board. We had to find aligned folks who would be there. We had to write bylaws. We had to shift from our attorney to be able to have somebody who really understands nonprofit. So that shift was not too much. I guess the challenge is when you are an LLC and you're basing your income off of the services you bring in, you have a little bit more control and a little bit more flexibility. Things go good or things don't go as well. As a nonprofit, our board voted on a salary. And so now the money that we bring in goes into expanding the ministry, expanding the apostolate, helping us to do what we need to do a little bit better. And so there's a little more stress, right? Because we have a small group that relies on us to be able to provide for them when we are dealing with, kind of a market in Catholic schools that generally does not have a lot of money, right? That can't really even afford some of the services that we offer.
Amongst some of these challenges that we'll be discussing in a second, let's start by actually sort of sharing with the audience some of the biggest wins so far since being a full mission-driven organization as a nonprofit.
I think the biggest win, so we are not starting this nonprofit from a position of having any independent wealth, right? So we really had nothing. And so our biggest win was finishing the last year in the black, right? That was a huge...
That's amazing. Yes.
So that's amazing. The other wins, they don't seem like wins, but they really are. Like having a really good group of board members that are super supportive and mission aligned. That's a huge win for us. Being able to hire a person who's managing our client relations and managing our CRM system, that's a huge win for us. So that we were able to bring in enough income in our first year to run in the black, expand some of our operations and do the good work that's done. I mean, the biggest wins are helping the schools that we're helping, right? But as an organization, having a board that's supporting us and being able to basically have enough income to support the operations so that we can be in a position to continue our growth or to really start to address our growth as we need to.
Yeah. And I think that from the get-go, having real clarity as to what the mission is and where you're trying to go allows you to have those wins earlier than most organizations expect. because the majority of organizations, or at least not in the nonprofit world, come into existence without that big funding. So it's easier of a path to seek funding when that mission is clear.
Correct.
And you obviously can articulate that. So when you're communicating that with donors, how do you do it effectively so that they're feeling and seeing what you're feeling and seeing?
Yeah, that's really been our challenge. I mean, to be quite honest, is that, my network is a network of educators. My network is a network that will provide us services. We can get leadership searches and we can get strategic planning. The network that I built is in that particular area. We have some small donors, like we have some people who have been super generous in helping us to buy podcast equipment or helping us to go on a conference or these types of things. But trying to figure out how I'm really good at asking money for other organizations. My wife is really good at asking money for other organizations. Our challenge is trying to figure out how we do that for ourselves, because we're so missionary minded that we're always thinking, how can we help these other folks? And so the challenge has been, how do we tell this story in a way that is humble, in a way that is, accurate to what we're doing, but is going to help engage donors to want to help us advance what we're doing and scale it appropriately. And that, to be honest, that's a challenge.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. If you and your wife are asking other people for money for other organizations, what do you think is that shift that needs to be made? So let's pretend that mission-driven Catholic isn't the fruit of what the Lord has given you, right? How would you go about asking, and I'm a 7-figure prospect, how would you go about asking me for money if mission-driven Catholic wasn't yours?
Yeah, well, what we would say, and what we have been starting in creating our case statements that we've been working on at the end of this year, is we are actually in the space helping to save souls. We are in the space helping Catholics function as they're supposed to function. We are doing the work that's necessary for the revitalization of Catholic education around the country, with a particular focus on strengthening the human family, right? If we're going to revitalize Catholic schools, if we're going to help them be what they're supposed to be, if we're going to help them to accomplish what they need to, they need the resource and support that we can provide at Mission Driven Catholic. In order for us to do that, we cannot just have a few people. We need to have more people that can generate interest, that can be out in the field, providing the level of support that we do, assisting with the strategic plans, that can be leading some of the searches, that can be mentoring and building a community and evangelizing community as our own company, so that we have the capacity to go out and to build. And so that's the message that we're trying to really carefully create.
So one of the things that I think you just did quite well is when you're communicating with potential donors, the need for support. You want to start with your why, which is, your mission, or at least your vision of where you're trying to go. And then you go with the vision as to how that mission is going to be fulfilled, which you just explained right there in those last 2 seconds, right? And then one step further that I always like to bring is talking about the actual results. And, here's what one of our schools told us, right? And then you go into telling that story, how we were able to change the entire mindset of this school and how they became a center for evangelization, as you said before. So I think that you're on track there. Then my question then comes into, how do you attract clients? And I'm talking about into the schools that you serve. Who do you interact with normally? Because I wonder if there's an opportunity here to have a long-term donor acquisition strategy down the line. But I wanted to let you answer that for a second.
Yeah. So one of the hallmarks of who we are is we value presence, right? And so a lot of where we have been able to develop our services or generate our leads or identify our clients has been through relationship. I mean, there's a lot of relationships that we built over the years. And so I work with a number of superintendents, right? Superintendents around the country help because they know if their schools need enrollment, or they know if they need a leadership change or something else like that. And so I'm in good relationship with the superintendents. There are several schools who they know themselves that they have a need, right? That maybe their diocese is not resourced well enough to be able to provide for them. And so going into the schools, When I sit down with a pastor and a principal and I let them know, we just want to help you to be the fullest of who you're supposed to be with your unique characteristics and your charism, to help you to be able to maybe not be a hidden gem, but a gem that the folks can see, right? We can help you do this. And when we have those relationships and we have those conversations, that's where we generate our services. It's not really consulting. It is in a way, right? That's the way it is on paper, but it really is a walking with, as my friend, Dr. Gilbert Sines wrote in his dissertation. It's an acompañamiento. It's a walking with. It's a being with these schools in really profound ways. Some of the stories that we have from the folks that we worked with have been about just huge conversions. Why? Because we pray with them. We support them. They're constantly in our intercessions. We're not just providing a service. We are building a community of faith.
Yes.
And we're tying them into this community and network of faith that's existing and growing around the country. And so the relationship is that primary place where we can engage. And it's at a diocesan level, and then even down at the school level. And with the families, it's networks of families that know us or know of us that we bring in as well. And so it's this proper networking that exists in the Catholic world.
So I think there's an opportunity here because, so full disclosure to our listeners right now, Dan actually works with the school that my children go to. Didn't even know this until we met at a conference that was completely unrelated to this, which is really
that was
weird
fantastic.
and funny in itself, how that took place. That being said, so some of the things that are popping up is some of these schools, like I'm thinking of the school, our local school, have really big prospects, and some that actually fund the school in a significant way, that really have a passion for really well done Catholic education. And if you, for example, have really great testimonials and really get great stories and results from particular schools, I wonder if that's down the line something that becomes a pipeline for you, right? Where you reach back out and you go, listen, what we did for you, we can do for other schools in your area or throughout the country. But one of the things I always tell people is that at its core, fundraising and development really is easy. It takes two big things to just make sure that it happens. One, an unshakable belief in the mission that, the Lord has put in your heart, especially if it's a ministry. And two, not being afraid of asking people for money. The great thing about number one is that it gets taken, it takes care of number two, right? So when you have that at your core, it makes it easy for you to go in a genuine way, like you're saying, without sounding pompous, like, hey, we want to do this for others. Here's what we're trying to do for other schools. Would love an introduction to either people who fund you or people who can be prospects or people who would be interested. That's like an avenue that probably could be worth exploring, because it's a good segue into the next part of the conversation, which is asking you what's worked in this short time, what's worked for mission-driven Catholic in terms of fundraising. You mentioned a little bit, you have some really committed donors. And what are some of the largest obstacles that you see that you probably need to overcome in order to expand and grow the way that you believe you can or that you should?
Yeah, I think really
combined question.
Really good questions. Like there's a little bit of a catch-22 to it, and that's where the challenge is. I think that you brought up a really good point, and it's where we're focused. We want to do the things we're doing really well, like really well.
Yes.
So services we provide, when we provide a leadership search, yes, what's the differential between us and others? There's nobody that does a leadership search as comprehensively as we do, and we charge.
I agree,
and we charge less because we know what schools can afford. And so if we're going to do a leadership search, we're going to do it excellent. We're going to do it as well as we possibly can. And we understand by doing that we are building up this capacity for other clients and potentially other donors and things like that. And so I'm glad that you reminded us of that, because that's really important for us to remember, kind of the catch of it. As we do things really successfully as a small organization, right? I'm the only one that we can afford who has expertise to do the executive level work that happens. The people that work for us are fantastic. Megan, my wife, who's with me on this as the executive vice president, she's really good. She develops all of our materials. She is fantastic at communication. She does all those things really well. Ashley, who works for us, she manages our clients. She is she's been a godsend to us in what she does. But as far as getting in and doing the analysis and doing the SWOT meetings and doing the leadership searches and the strategic planning, it's just me. And so in order to have enough income for us to run the company, right, 85% of my time is managing contracts. I'm about to go out to, for 2 weeks, I'm going to be on the road to go into Portland and then to Tampa and then to Pensacola and then to Alaska in a 2-week stretch. I'm not going to be home during those 2-week stretch, which is too much because our ability to focus on what we need to from scaling the company up and my ability to be able to do this without burning out, right?
Yes.
Limits, because if we're going to do the services as well as we can and have the money that we need in order for the organization to be where it is, it's a heavy lift, right? And so that is the largest roadblock. The other roadblock that was challenging last year was that we did not have the approved 501c3 status. We were waiting for that. The Knights of Columbus came in at the end of the year to be a fiscal sponsor, which is such a blessing for us. So now we have that, but we operated an entire year without really being able to give tax deductible contributions. And that was a challenge because we lost the year to generate major donors that could have helped us scale up to take the edge off where we are right now. So those are two of the big challenges we face.
Yeah, the second one's a real challenge, especially in startup mode when you're doing so many things. And obviously, you know what you're trying to do. So the tendency is usually to do these well, that you miss that opportunity in that window. I don't think it's fully lost yourself. So there's a couple of things that are coming to mind. And here's a question that may help us clarify. From what you're telling me, and I think this is common among startup ministries, I think timing or the timing to do everything that you need to do is a real issue. A day does not have 48 hours. It has 24 hours, right? So my question to you is this, because I think there's two ways you can go about it. And you probably know this already, but what's more important right now? Is it more important to build that pipeline of clients to be able to then train somebody who can do the analysis as good as you? Or is it to get the funding from donations to be able to hire somebody else to then actually take care of a development and you can focus on the gift of doing, of helping your clients well? So what do you think you're leaning in that dichotomy?
Yeah, another really good question. And we've been wrestling with this quite a bit. The focus is to build the philanthropy. It's not to get more services so that we can hire somebody with the service income, because we know the service income is not going to be enough to be able to pay for an executive salary. Like, we know that. Like, we have a desire to be a 50-50 organization where, the services that we are basically offering are kind of at 50% of what's going to cost. So we need 50% philanthropy to be able to do that, right? We can't build that 50-50 mentality or that 50-50 culture if we can't spend significant amount of time in actually designing, building the philanthropy arm of what we need to do. And once that's in place, as we start to receive gifts to help us to serve more schools in the apostolate, that gives us the freedom and flexibility to start bringing people on, which then will open up our window and remove the bottleneck, right? For us to be able to bring some people on who can take care of certain tasks that we have, which would free up more time for us to grow. So that's, to me, the building philanthropy is the most important, but we have to, at the same time, from a prudent standpoint, manage enough contracts that's going to provide the stability. So right now we're doing okay. And like financially we are where we need to be. But when I said we finished in the black, I mean, we barely finished in the black, right? Just above zero. A few more zeros would have been there, but just above zero. And so as we get into spring and summer, and as we think about next year, we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of our finances in such a way that, like, we're not scrapping to try to find another contract just to make things work.
Yes. So I do agree there. Here's a couple of things that are coming up to mind. I think that you're going to have a really good challenge, like a good problem in your hands coming up for two main reasons. One, what you do is valuable, and you're going to find that more and more schools are going to want it, both based on your relationships and based on your actual results so far. So I think that's going to be a really good problem. I think the challenge is going to come in when to say yes and when to say no.
Great.
I think to your point, what you just said, this summer probably is going to be a really good time for you to analyze these things. Obviously, there's no school. Most importantly, you can take a step back and go, okay, what connections have I made that are going to allow me to actually lean a little bit further into that philanthropic aspect that we're trying to accomplish in the fall? You have to, of course, balance that out with enough contracts coming in the fall.
Yeah.
It's really a beautiful dance here that you're, very delicate that you're trying to accomplish. And one, I admire it. Don't envy you.
Thanks.
Where you are, which is, really hard, but really beautiful to see. I think that's a reality of startup ministries who know what they're trying to do, which is actually, really, really good. So one of the things that's coming to mind again is having a really great case for support. So I always tell people that the case for support, especially because I think you can use it from the get-go, especially to establish your relationships. Because yes, there might be a client, but look at what you're trying to accomplish. Like, it doesn't hurt giving it to a client and going straight into what the mission of the organization is, what you're trying to accomplish this year, and the gifts that you're trying to go to obtain in order to get there. That in itself allows a client to go, okay, I see what you're doing. And as a matter of fact, it actually could help a client to go, we actually should be thinking of those things. Because a whole different podcast episode would be, why aren't enough Catholic schools doing development the right way?
Right.
And you know what I'm saying? That's a whole different discussion. Because I think there's a big lack in just Christian schools, period. But especially I think in the Catholic world.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point.
Go ahead.
You bring up a really good point, because one of the things, another distinguishing characteristics of who we are is we believe in exemplary practice, right? And so we, as mission-driven Catholic, want to be an exemplary organization with how you're supposed to run as an apostolate as well. Like, we want to make sure we're doing that right. Like, we want to make sure our salary structure is considering the human person and it's fitting with church teaching on what it's supposed to be when we bring people on. We want to make sure our development efforts that we have for our own company are imitatable for schools, so they know what they need to do in their particular area. We want to make sure that we are a center of evangelization as a company, right? Even so much as we're thinking about, we need to find a space so that we can gather, right? And not just be virtual, but be in person, right? To be able to have a center of evangelization that is doing that work here so that we can be imitatable centers of evangelization out in the other area. So that's really important for us. Like, all of those things, like, we're thinking about and we're learning as we're going as an institution. We conducted an exercise ourselves, right? And we asked the 7 kind of major questions so that we would make sure that we were aligned as an organization, as an apostolate, and our board members as well, including asking those questions, to your point afterwards, like, who is it that we serve, right? And so, like, who are we? What do we do? Who is it that we serve? What problem are we trying to address? What's the solution? What makes us unique, right? And that exercise was very clarifying, because even though my wife and I were very clear with one another on it, we needed to make sure our board members were clear on that. We needed to make sure that those working with us were clear on it. We needed to make sure when we were talking with other folks afterwards that those statements are super clear. By doing that work with one of our board members, he was very good in walking us through that. We were able to really come to much more clarity in how we're going to assess and figure out who we're going to work with afterwards. If we get to this place where we have more contracts, we know how to discern and reflect on those that want to be working with us.
Yes. So here's 3 things that I think that are popping up on my end based on this discussion. One, and I think that anyone listening can actually plan around these strategies. One is, of course, having a very strong case for support. That doesn't happen by itself, because you mentioned something that I like to talk about all the time. I think it's just human behavior to go, we like to assume that what's in our head, what's in our mind, people automatically know, right? Like, if it's clear to me, obviously it's clear to you. Do you know what I'm saying? So, like, walking yourself out through that set of questions that you said, and having people in the organization do the exact same thing, whether that's a board or a staff, and helping you understand, okay, here's where we are. Because belief in the mission, we always talk about in the way that we do our coaching in the program, it is that beliefs plus relationships equals funds, right? It all starts with beliefs. but believes in their mission doesn't happen unless there's unity in those involved in the mission. And unity is never going to come about unless there's clarity, because clarity creates unity, right? So being clear there is going to help you, and then you're going to develop the case of support. One of the good things that I think is working for you right now, that's probably the opposite for most startup nonprofits, is that you have a clear avenue for revenue making from client acquisition, right? That's super helpful. The best way to treat a client is the exact same way that you're going to eventually treat a donor, right? Because no client grows, no client understands, no client really gets what you're trying to do for them unless they trust you. And they don't get to trust you without that relationship, right? And obviously, you do the beliefs, you do the relationships, and that's going to generate the funds down the line. And for organizations that have a revenue making model outside of the philanthropy aspect, and I've been there before, this is where I actually developed my or cut my teeth in development, was once the client gets it, they're going to be your number one donor acquisition partner, if not donors themselves, depending on the type of
Right.
programming that you do. And that's really helpful. As we come to the last few minutes, I want to ask you one quick question for our listeners to take away with. Early stage startups, any new nonprofit or any nonprofit that's still struggling to get traction, what would be one piece of advice to those nonprofit or ministry executives struggling with getting traction when it comes down to funding, one way or the other? What would it be if you were in their shoes?
I think that there are a couple things, right? If you're a faith-based organization, I'll start there, right? If you're a faith-based organization, I think the first thing to remember is that it's not ours. It's right. It's the Lord's. And so it's really important to not just say that we are a faith-based organization, but to function that way, to make sure that we're codifying our practices as a faith-based organization in really substantial ways. We're praying together. We're praying with and for the people that are, and we're not just saying it, but we're doing the work where we're praying and connecting what it is that we need to do through this discernment of what do you want, Lord, for this.
Yes.
So that's for those faith-based organizations. But for any organization, faith-based or not, the most important thing to do, I would say, is to make sure that your mission is very clear. Like that is the most important, because what happens is you need to know what it is that you're doing, because that is going to feed everything else, whether it's a service or whether it's a donor, whatever else it is. Like we know that we're helping schools become centers of evangelization. That's who we are. And if a school doesn't want to become a center of evangelization, then we're not going to work with them.
They're not your client.
They're not our clients. So we know who we are and we know what we want to accomplish. And that becomes the lens for all of our decisions. And we trust that that's also going to become the lens for all of our conversations with potential donors and folks like that. Like we believe that is a compelling mission. We believe the Lord wants it. We know clearly what we're doing. And so then moving that now into the space is the next step. It's trusting and allowing him to use us as vessels to bring more people on board, because it's not about us. At the end of the day, what's your will, Lord? How can we accomplish that through what we're doing? Who would you like us to go to and ask? And I think all of that comes from really good, clear mission. And that's why we're mission-driven Catholic. Like the mission is key. This is the same for like a razor company, right? If you're making razors and all of a sudden you want to make tacos, you're in trouble. Like you're making razors. That's your mission. That's your niche, right? All business literature goes right there. For Christian and Catholic organizations, like we've already given the mission. Go and make disciples of all the nations, right? So make sure that you're aligned to what that is, right? And then push it out. And so at least in Catholic education, right? That's what we do, go out and make disciples of all the nations. So making sure that there's alignment and clarity, to your point, clarity brings unity. And that is the most important thing you can do, because when you have different messages, it falls apart. You won't build philanthropy. You won't build a culture around you. You can't build a community without clarity and unity, right? All of that falls apart. It seems like it doesn't pay the most dividends, but it does, because that's at the end of the day, what's going to attract donors and attract clients to what you're doing.
If I'm a listener, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, I'm a superintendent or a principal. What do I fund Mission Driven Catholic? How do I get involved?
There are two things, right? So one, I would invite everybody to pray with us. We have a daily podcast. It's called the Catholic Daily Drive. It's 5 to 7 minutes long. We do a psalm, we do the gospel of the day, the saint of the day, a brief reflection, and we pray for and with Catholic schools around the country. First and foremost, you join us in that prayer community. Like, pray with us, right? It's called the Catholic Daily Drive because it takes you from unless you work from home, it takes you from your driveway to your workplace to be able to get what the Lord wants to tell us for that particular day. So please pray for and with us. That'd be number one. If you want to know what we have for services, you can visit us on missiondrivencatholic.com. That's our website. All of our services are there. You can reach out to us in that way. But there's a lot of information about what we do, how to contact us, and who we can work with. Some testimonials about folks that we've worked with already. And so that's how you can find us. And, if you know somebody who can benefit from becoming a center of evangelization as a school with families that could just benefit from being partners with us in any way, let them know we're here, because it's all about building up the body of Christ. It's all about saving souls.
Please check them out. Really quick, can they donate on your website?
Yeah, there is a donation on our website. So they can go on to Mission Driven Catholic, I think /donate, but there is a tab on there that they can give to us.
Every little bit helps. Please prayerfully consider supporting this great mission. If you are a nonprofit leader and you want to build a stronger donor strategy, please reach out. There's the link to us here below. You can also go to our website, mrpdonordev.com. That's MRPDONORDEV, like donordevelopment.com, and book a strategy call there. Please reach out to Dan. Thank you for being a part of this program, Dan. Really appreciate you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time. Oh, remember to keep your donors at the heart and center of everything that you do. God bless.
God bless you.
1,